Name's Bond. James Bond.
Hold on to your hat. It's going to be such a fast ride. And it was.
So, where do banks come in, right? So, funnily enough, banks lending money for interest was always regarded as a sin, right? So, which was why many God-fearing sort of Christians never got involved in the process. If you look back through history, it was always the Jewish guys that were the money lenders, right? So the root of credit is Latin for I believe, credo, right? So I believe at some date you will repay the money that I am lending you, right? Credit. Simple, right? And banks comes from the Italian banchi, where the Jewish money lenders used to sit on the benches, the banchi, and lend out money, right? So that's basically how it started. It wasn't until the Italian Renaissance when a fellow by the name of Giovanni de' Medici made money lending sort of sexy, right? So he financed forex trading, he bought the churches, he got them to change their opinion on no interest, what he did was he rationalized it by saying that he wasn't charging interest, he was just charging a commission for converting from one currency into another, and hence forex was born. Hence there was no interest, hence there was no sin. So he sort of legitimized the practice, and that allowed it to really grow and to scale. And there's some quotes about fellows by one of the guys, Cosimo de' Medici. He is king in everything but name. Political matters are settled at his home. He decides wars. He decides who will live. So we can see there was always a link between wealth and power. It sounds a lot like state capture, doesn't it? It sounds a lot like the Guptas. Well, maybe they're the Medicis, reincarnated. Who knows? So having said that, there's always been this link between wealth and power, no matter how far back you go in history. Okay? Now let's look at the second major asset class, bonds. So what is a bond? You get government bonds, you get corporate bonds. Basically, the bond pays a fixed rate of interest to the bondholder. So it pays what's called a coupon rate, which is a sort of fixed rate. And I'll tell you a little bit about how it started. So it started actually in Italy 600 years ago during the Renaissance. So you can see Italy at the time was quite innovative in its sort of financial instruments and things that it created at the time. It's not just the art that it was famous for. The Renaissance period was actually very famous for all our financial innovations that we still see today, right? So it paid that fixed rate of interest. It has a inverse relationship to interest rates, right? So might seem somewhat illogical, but try and bear with me as I explain. So what happens usually is that when the cost of borrowing money increases or rises, so interest rates go up, bond prices generally fall, right? And vice versa. So when interest rates come down, bond prices go up, right? So think about this, right? So if you're holding a bond and inflation is 10%, right? But your bond is paying 5% interest, right? So you as a bondholder, you're falling behind in real terms, right? Whereas if inflation was at 2% or 1% and your bond is paying 5%, you're actually getting wealthier as time goes by. So hence the sort of inverse relationship, right? So this is something that's been known since the start of human history. Governments always spend more than they receive in taxation. They make up that difference by selling bonds to pay that interest. The government doesn't have to give you your cash back, right? So you purchase a bond, you can't go to the government, knock on the door tomorrow and say, I want my money back, right? What do? You have to go and sell it in a secondary market. a bond market, right? So that's the kind of thinking and the fundamentals that also laid the basis for the stock market, which we'll touch on, right? So yeah, so the Italian Renaissance used something, they used to use a what was called a condottieri, which were people. So like, think about the hawks. So those kind of people, sort of, they would go and they would annex land and take land from neighboring states, and in return, you know, um, the people they would have to pay them a tax. But now, how do you go and take someone else's land if you don't have money to do that, right? So you need an army, you need soldiers, you need to pay the soldiers. So what on earth do you do? So simple. You create bonds, you borrow money from the public, you use that money to now go fight your wars, right? So if you think about Russia and the Ukraine, people might not realize this, but we've enabled it. We've allowed our pension funds and discretionary funds to go into these bond instruments that are now being used to fund wars. So there's a guy very famous on LinkedIn who's always having a go at things like crypto and stuff, and I just positioned it. Our money is going into the bond market. We are responsible for things in the system. So we need to open our eyes in terms of what we're doing and the way things are operating. And the bond markets have been always linked to war, because war is impossible if you don't have the money to pay for it, right? So now I'm going to tell you about one of the greatest business deals in history that has sort of, if you look at it under today's lens, it would be highly unethical to behave in such a way. It would also be classified as market manipulation, maybe even a pump and dump. But back then, the rules of the game were very different, and what transpired was perfectly acceptable, known as business practice, right? So everyone's heard of the Rothschilds, right? Family with a dynasty of bankers, but their story starts off in a German ghetto, right? So in those days, to dehumanize people living in a ghetto, you weren't identified by your name, you were identified by a symbol. So Rothschild is actually German for red shield. So there was a red shield hanging outside the door of Meyer Amschel Rothschild, who was Nathan's grandfather, right? So Nathan Rothschild was a banker and came from a family of bankers as they progressed out of the system, and he took one of the biggest speculative bets. Now, so what used to happen was that in wars, so the government would raise funds to fight these wars, right? But you can't really feed a soldier with a bond, can you? You need some sort of form of money or some unit of value. So what Nathan did was he purchased all the gold bullion that he could, right? So he invested everything. He bet the house on gold bullion, right? Expecting a very long, protracted war during the Battle of Waterloo. And because what that would do is it would make him rich. The longer the war went on, more the demand for gold would be, the higher the price would be, right? So what he did was he arranged to get the news of the result of the war one day before news would go out to the rest of the UK, right? So he had his own private sort of messenger system that was doing it, and contrary to his belief, the war was over in a day or two, right? So it was a very short war. Napoleon was defeated. Britain was now going to be a sort of superpower. So Nathan got this information one day before everybody else in Britain. So what did he do? He started a rumor, and now he was going to lose heavily, right? Because he had just invested so much in gold, whereas bonds were going to go up. So he started this rumor that Britain had lost the war, and as rumors happen, nobody thinks rationally. Everybody just believes what they're told. Spread like wildfire. all around Britain, people were panicking. They were selling their bonds because their bonds were suddenly going to lose value. And what Nathan started doing was he started buying up all those bonds, converting that bullion, purchasing as many bonds as he could. Next day, the messenger arrives. News breaks out that Britain has won the war, and the price of bonds starts skyrocketing, and so does Nathan's wealth and his family's wealth. And what does he do? An ordinary person will say, right, thank you very much, I'll take your profits, I'll take my profits, I'll sell. He didn't sell. He waited for 2 years. He understood that with Napoleon gone, there would be a period of peace, prosperity, stability. So he continued to let the market run, and 2 years later, it was around 1817, he sold his profits, recorded profits in 1817, 600 million pounds in 1817. Do you understand how much that is in today's money, let alone back in 1817, right? I mean, no wonder these guys control all the banks and they control the financial system, because that is a serious amount of money, right? So I hope you enjoyed and you found this section informative. So we went through the liquid instruments in cash and bonds, and next time I'm going to take you through the more longer term, more capital appreciation intensive asset classes, and we'll start having a look at some front fact sheets, and we'll start doing some practical applications. Okay, thanks very much. Take care. Bye.